Hey, you. Get off your fucking telephone. That stupid goddamn telephone. Watching movies on your goddamn telephone. Anyway, hi. Welcome back to the dumps. This is Xander. This is gonna be a bit more of a chill one because it's just me, myself, and I, and we're here to talk about David Lynch. It's the David Lynch spotlight, and today we're gonna be talking about two of his movies, uh, Eraserhead and Mulholland Drive, both consecutively in 1977 and 2001, respectively. And these are two of Lynch's most popular works, along with his most iconic series, and his only series, Twin Peaks. And I guess before we talk about David Lynch's films, I guess we gotta talk about who he is exactly. Because David Lynch is probably a name you've heard in passing as like one of the main art house directors out there, but overall as a director, he's been one of the most influential filmmakers of all time. His film Eraserhead was considered one of the first midnight movies, which is basically just a term for much more lower ground filmmaking that really appealed to that like midnight. I forget how exactly to describe it, but I guess you could call it, because I remember it's just Eraserhead is just known for being one of the main examples. Midnight Movies even has like a book on it, which is very interesting considering the concept seems simple, but yeah. I guess, okay, from what I'm reading, it's like low budget genre movies as like late night programming. And from a more vibe significance, from a more cultural relevance, Eraserhead just really fit that surreal late night vibe. And this is definitely one of the most Lynchian of Lynch movies, which, if you've heard that term, yeah, it comes from David Lynch, which means it just means a cinematic style of presenting movies in an almost dreamlike sense from a less coherent reality, which is what makes his film so fascinating to me. And a lot of that comes from his own origins as a child. He was he was born and raised in Virginia for a long time, a Boy Scout, and he just liked the natural surroundings of his area and did a lot of various just spiritual things, which is why he practices meditation today. And I think one of the most core aspects is the fact that he originally was going to be a painter. David Lynch as a painter, that's a bit weird, but if you look back on his short films and you look at production behind them, that's what they basically were. They were basically just showcases of his art in some sort of motion. Six Men Getting Sick is basically just a couple of moving pictures recycled back and forth. Really disturbing pictures. And it's an okay short, but it really does represent a lot. And learning that made me really think about David Lynch as a filmmaker, because when you look at his films and you wonder who the like pardon me, who the hell like comes up with these things? But if you look even in the slightest on like a Wikipedia page, I think it's easy to recognize what David Lynch really is. And he just wants to just get a grasp on the just dreams, his just own imagination. I remember I read this college speech he did back when he revisited his college, the American Film Institute College, University, whatever it's specifically called. But I remember he was talking about how storytelling was just all about what you can think of. It's all about conflict, is what he said. He described it as light and dark, love and pain, struggle, all kinds of things. And he described this in this almost beautiful way. And you could feel like he sees film as a sort of energy, as a sort of different reality where he can just morph it into this weird place it is. Yeah, and if I'm looking back on this, he just describes emotions again and again. Negativity, anger, sorrow, depression. I'm just naming off what the speech says. But even in his depression, he describes it as real depression, of how you can hardly get out of like bed. He just says just blow such negativity away. He wants to get rid of such thoughts, and you just wants to expand his understanding and awareness, which is what makes his film so self-aware in the right way, where it's trying to explore not the mechanics of reality, but rather the feelings of it and how you see it, how you view it. And I guess that's why he meditates. In fact, that's what he says. He just doesn't want to become laid back, and that's what makes all his films and projects so weird. And I guess that speech really encapsulates him. And I guess that could lead me to talking about Eraserhead, because originally the idea did not just come from what the basic Wikipedia says. It comes from a dream where he saw a man being taken to a pencil factory. Yeah, that's one of the reasons, not the whole reason. David Lynch describes in Eraserhead stories, the Criterion bonus, that it's a sort of amalgamation of like all the thoughts he had around 1970, which is when the film was really starting to get developed around then. Because Lynch at the time was still making his short films, and he originally studied it for fine arts, and he even originally was going to move to Europe for 5 years, 3 to 5 years, but ended up only staying there for 15 days and going back because he didn't feel the vibe was right. And somewhere around the line, around that timeline, he went into the Critical Film Studies program, which AFI offered him after seeing his short films. And after the alphabet, but yeah, something like about fine arts and some shit. Sorry, I'm not very clear on all the rules. I didn't write notes. This is very lenient. But he basically went to AFI, and he wasn't really enjoying critical film studies. He said it was kind of boring him, that it wasn't really challenging him, and he wasn't really, but the main reason why he stayed was AFI was going to fund his feature film, which is now the direction he was going now. After the alphabet, which apparently either the dean of the school or the principal of the school, dean, the whatever, which thought was very interesting and funded it to like be completed, and then eventually through trust from the Alphabet Project, they went on to collaborate for Eraserhead, which is why Eraserhead sets even exist, because a lot of the Eraserhead sets are stuff owned by AFI. Basically, they allowed Lynch to transform whatever sets they have left, basically all the scraps, to create the wasteland that you see in the movie today. And specifically, there was this like mansion that they used to create, I guess, either the apartment rooms, all the indoor scenes. And then there is just the fact that the movie was originally just a 45-page script, and it was originally just going to be just like, yeah, I forget which, like 20 to 45 pages, and it was going to be just 45 minutes, which is what AFI funded for. That's how much they funded for. But even when they were funded for that time frame, during that 6-week shoot, they were still begging for funding for this movie. But eventually, Lynch was sort of unsatisfied, and the production just kept on going for about either 5 to 6 years, and eventually they finished production, which took much longer than expected. But the film changed at that time, because the original manuscript basically was just like a bunch of vague descriptors that the actors should do. Because, as you know, Eraserhead is not a very dialogue-heavy piece. It's a lot more, if I were to describe this, just a lot more of a thinking movie, just staring at the images and having to just think about them for a while. But eventually, you sort of just start to entertain the idea, and I guess through this sort of improvisational, constantly in danger production, Lynch found his style, and he already found the sort of dreamlike imagery and the still frames and all the important stuff that he needed from those short films. But having to take that to a full like feature length required a lot of talent and a lot of learning. And through this learning process, I think Lynch was able to figure out exactly how to shoot movies, how productions of his movies should go. And yeah, it really does show in the final product, because he took basically the visual design of all his drawings and all his early short films, with the barren wastelands and just the absolute darkness and just shittiness of like the apartment building where the elevator takes so long to close its doors, or the house that Henry visits early on in the film with his now forcefully married wife to meet the parents feels just so different compared to outside, which is just a completely just barren household, compared to this kind of comfy but sort of empty place where a lot of the shots just kind of linger on and on and on as you just hear them awkwardly try to get Henry to say something about any of this, about any that's happening. And we're viewing this from sort of Henry's perspective where he knows that, and which is why he feels so distant compared to everyone else. There's a lot of wide shots in the house, despite it being an enclosed space. And a lot of what's happening is just sort of the sounds just erupting and just taking over, and just Henry trying to ignore most of what is happening in the first place. There's this one shot where he meets the father, and he's fixing like the fridge or whatever like machinery in the kitchen, and he says hi to him in this like awkward stilted way, but he doesn't like look straight at him, and even then he's like just really far from him. They don't get really a detail of each other. They don't really get close and personal. Even at the dinner table, there's this wide shot, and every once in a while they cut to important pieces of dialogue, and it's just like, oh. And then Henry just gets backed into a corner and basically forced to just let out all these emotions from the mother, who's just asking, did you have sex with my daughter? Did you have intercourse with her? And it's just like this breaking point, not in the extra dramatic climactic way like something like Marriage Story, where it's just yelling constantly, or just a traditional climax. You're just sort of left there to be like, just sort of weak. And the way it's shot makes you feel weak in general, because it's just erupted in darkness as this woman sort of just yells at you. Because from this angle, you're like way more closer to Henry than you are to the mother, as she tries to get closer to him, and therefore to the audience. And it's just this very surreal imagery. And even then, this is not the straight up abstract stuff like the whole pencil factory montage. This is just sort of looking at this barren wasteland and getting so much emotion out of it, which can really recognize like Lynch's true talents as a filmmaker through watching this movie and through learning about how it was made. And this is just like a very deliberately paced opening as well. Like half the movie feels like it's just beginning, and then the second half is just an instantaneous just descent into madness, which can feel a bit off on the first viewing, but it went by so smoothly on like the second viewing. And it's really interesting to me just how well it was captured from both a filmmaking and a script perspective. But even then, this movie didn't really have a script anyway, so I can't even say I should compliment it there at all. And then if you're wondering about the second half of the movie, there is two very important things. There's the baby, and then there's the dream sequence. Now, early on, the opening scene is basically the most abstract birth of a human being, or whatever the baby is, and I think that kind of sets you up for like the rest of the movie, because this first image is of like Henry sideways, as like this thing, like sort of just phases in and out of this man, like these two images coming together, and then eventually it turns into just a sperm, and it's like inside Henry. And it's like this pure, this like pure being, and through his sexual arousal, the sperm gets shot into this hole, eventually birthed out. It feels more like a factory manufacturing a machine rather than a human being, and I guess that sort of portrays what the movie is all about. I know everyone thinks it's about fatherhood, it's about responsibility, but in general, just a fear of having to see a newer generation take over, having to see your life being consumed by this thing, and not really knowing what the thing is feeling, which is why the baby looks the way it is. It's like a mix of E.T. and like my sock, like a really wet sock, and it's just a really nightmarish image. But it works so perfectly in trying to, I guess, visualize Henry's terror. And the fact is, the whole cast and crew, David Lynch himself, have not talked about what the baby is and what it's made of, or whether or not it's a puppet or not. David Lynch has said, it just happened to pop by, or we found it, which, that's even more creepy, because we don't know what this thing is made of. Like, if you were to tell me about like, oh, look at these, like, all these magic tricks, like 80s films and all the puppetry and all the special effects. There's a lot of behind the scenes footage of that. For Eraserhead, they specifically were contractually obligated to not ask about the baby. They don't want to tell you about the baby and what it is. And the person who designed it doesn't want to say anything. David Lynch doesn't want to say anything. And he's kept it a vague wording. And I guess we'll just never know what this baby is. And I think that kind of benefits it. Because you believe it. Because you don't know what it is just as much as Henry doesn't know what it is. And there's just something really incredible to that sort of dynamic from a both meta perspective and from a storytelling perspective. That's one of the more weirder aspects of the movie, just the ominous feeling of the stupid baby. Like, God damn it. I shouldn't be scared of this baby. I shouldn't be. But there's something really horrifying about that baby. And ever since I first watched it, I haven't been able to get this movie out of my mind. Because I remember watching this back in October and thinking, I was really tired, so that made it even weirder, and it kind of gave me that sort of midnight movie perspective from, those people who originally saw the movie, like, during one of those midnight screens, like something like Rocky Horror Picture Show or this movie. And I was really in the moment with it. There's just a lot of interesting places in this movie. And specific objects are given this sort of distortion, and especially with the sound design. The sound design both works as not just an atmospheric perspective, but somehow they turn the atmosphere into sort of Henry's thought process. Because when, like, weird things are happening and he's, like, clearly stressed out, even though his face doesn't really say anything since he's so monotone, and played, like, extremely well by, what's his name? Jack Nance. Jack Nance was really good at playing this, like, stoic character. But even then, you could tell by, like, brief motions of his eyes that something is wrong and that something just doesn't feel right to him. And there's something cool about that. And, there's the iconic haircut for Jack Nance's character, Henry. Everyone talks about that, but I never truly got what it meant. And I don't think anyone really discusses what the hell Eraserhead even is. Like, what does that term actually mean in the movie, and what does that hair mean? And to me, it feels like he's both stoic, but also energetic to live his own life, but he's trapped in this sort of, I guess, just situation where he didn't realize he impregnated someone. And that's part of that sort of fits into the theme, because it's all about taking responsibility. But he didn't realize what he did was wrong and didn't take responsibility or thought about his actions, which therefore led them to this situation. And he's not adult enough to, like, truly keep his head together, which is why his head is just a fuzzy, just distorted, like, piece of hair. And it's such an iconic shot where the one where all the eraser just dust just, like, fumbles around as he just stands there with his eyes staring out. And that's a very important dream sequence where basically every one of his fears comes together in this montage. And you're just sort of left there to think, what the hell is wrong with Henry? Like, you think that the lack of dialogue will further make his character feel alien, which, yeah, it does. But at the same time, visually, it already tells you a lot. And sound design, it even tells you a lot. And if we're going to be talking about other parts of the movie, then there's the final part I want to discuss. Something like Eraserhead, I can sort of figure out, but the lady, the beautiful girl across the hall, the lady in the radiator, that's what it was. The radiator lady, for the life of me, I cannot figure out what it means. Because you just see everything's in heaven, and I guess from a basic point of view or from a basic observation, you can say it's meant to represent the purity of, like, innocence before becoming a father, or it could mean something like every bright side has its flaw, which is why her cheeks are that. But I can never just honestly try to make sense of it. And this whole movie just has this really weird aura where it both moves fast but also lingers on so many goddamn things. It's almost terrifying to me how well it just feels timeless, and how even Lynch's probably most documented work, even has a whole book on the David Lynch files, or otherwise known as David Lynch and Eraserhead. Books like that, they've well documented the production behind this movie. Still, it's a really weird process. And then there's, not to talk about the deaths, where I think the director of photography, like originally, just straight up died. I swear to God, this movie is like haunted, and at this point, I'm just going on minced words and describing it, but you really kind of have to watch it to sort of understand what I'm trying to talk about here, because this movie is not easy to either watch or try to remember, because when you remember this movie, you just remember how you feel watching it. You don't really try to make sense of it, which is why it was so good as a midnight movie, which is why it's so good as a movie. And man, even though I gave it like an 87 out of 100 or 8 out of 10, I've been sort of wanting to lean it towards more 9, and I'm not sure which, because I do have a couple problems where I think that his wife really should have been there. And originally, this movie was much longer, with more scenes with the wife, I'm pretty sure. And so that would have been actually really nice. With what was her name? I'm looking at this. Her name is Mary X. What the hell? But yeah, doing more scenes with Mary could have really led to that scene. But also at the same time, they kind of already convey the emotions of her through that one scene where she leaves Henry, which leads to the rest of the plot. But even then, I think they really could have expanded a bit more on that. And just, good God, this movie just fucking warps my brain. Even outside of that, I do think this is a really good movie. But it's not perfect. And I'd say the Lynch film we're talking about next is a much more just realized project. For me, at least. And, you know, I guess that's all I really have to say about the movie. But, yeah. And to account for all this, the fact that this was shot all in LA and was also oddly inspired by Philadelphia is really funny to me, because the art college he went to originally was in Philadelphia, and he says he hated like being there, like he hated just being in Philadelphia, which is funny to me because I've been watching It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and so that's funny to imagine me, and that just made me think of Frank Reynolds' character played by Danny DeVito in It's Always Sunny, talking to David Lynch within the show. That's actually really funny to me. But yeah, that apparently happened, and I guess, yeah, just a lot of this movie really does feel like a mashup of many things, which is why it doesn't feel as complete to me as the rest of Lynch's work, which is why I don't really think it's a perfect movie. But as this was my first Lynch movie, back when I first watched it, I'm still very, very shook by it, and I still appreciate it a hell of a ton, and especially having to do research a bit on this. So cool that this movie exists, and I'm so glad that like it led to David Lynch's the rest of his work, and I mean that. I'm excited to get to that stuff, and I might even talk about his other movies as I go along in this podcast itself. Who knows? The dump kind of just goes wherever it wants to go. So, yeah, I love this movie a lot. I really like it, and I hope to sort of, I guess, just talk about it more. But yeah, I guess I'll leave on this last note about the Philadelphia thing. But yeah, apparently when Lynch spent 5 years living there, he described it as violence, hate, and filth, and described it as a crime-ridden poverty zone, which inspired Eraserhead's backdrop. So, yeah, thank you, Patty's Puff. You guys should watch It's Always Sunny. It's a really funny show. But yeah, and I think it's kind of ironic to me because David Lynch basically distorted his own, I guess, upbringing, and sort of, I guess, tried to ruin the image of Philadelphia. So yeah, this is a Philadelphia propaganda movie. It's anti-Philadelphia. That's fun. And so is Mulholland Drive. Mulholland Drive sort of fits that category with most David Lynch films, where it distorts and sort of transforms the idea of what originally the place is, and in this case being the real Mulholland Drive, and other Hollywood images like Sunset Boulevard, all those places, and it's like, yeah, I guess it sort of follows that same type of deal, and they're both connected in that way. It's just that Mulholland Drive is much more mature, like a less adolescent. It's not one that's completely from like the flawed character's perspective. It's one that goes through different perspectives in order to create a larger narrative, which makes this film so interesting, to me at least. It sort of just instead of focusing on this one perspective from a very flawed character, we're focusing on just like the different perspectives and trying to gain a sense of what Hollywood does to people. And that's what makes Mulholland Drive so interesting to me, because it was basically just a lot of talking. And I didn't expect it to just have so many different views of the way Hollywood just portrays it. And the one remarkable scene to me has always been the Naomi Watts acting scene, where her character Betty does an audition with who played the dude? I forget his name. Yeah, Jimmy Katz, played by Chet Everett. Where they both have this erotic play act where they sort of try to figure out what their motivation is and what they want. And I was sort of sat there shocked by how real it was. And weirdly that the acting for the actual people, like outside of the set, felt more fake than the acting during that shoot. And that left me a bit shook, because a lot of that scene is just like revealing secrets about how this person wants to murder his their mistress, and how he wants her, and how just he'll do anything for her, and there's like this complicated dynamic, and it just sort of parallels to Betty and Rita's story, where they're both manipulating each other or using each other, which was once pure, but by the end of this movie, it really weirdly just gets distorted. Because at first, the opening is Rita, played by Laura Herring, and she looks like a heavenly star. It's like, oh, there was two girls on the poster. I thought they were gonna be together, and then something shocking happens where she gets hit by a car. And the funny thing about it is that you sort of get the foreshadow, because you get the shots where you see the group of party goers just like on the car, just like smashing their heads and just like enjoying themselves, while this woman gets stopped and is ready to either get killed or whatever was going to happen to her. Maybe that gun was not even for anything at all. And you see it being interrupted by it. Like a sort of melding of like Hollywood's dark secrets with the way people view Hollywood, and how they both get torn down. And then, quite literally, Rita has to like crawl below like the Hollywood sign to go to some sort of safety. She rose up to the top of Mulholland Drive and then had to crawl her way down to reality, to this shady town. And that kind of really sets a lot of what the movie's themes are, because you are given a lot of interesting ideas, and early on they're just throwing a lot of stuff at you. In particular, there's the iconic jump scare. The Lynchian jump scare. Everyone talks about this scene. So there's these two detectives or presumably just two people in a bar. One of them looks like a detective to me, at least. And they just sort of sit there and discuss how this one man, the other guy, he saw visions of something. He doesn't know what, but he remembers this exact diner, this exact place, and the other dude being like right next to the door waiting. And it's sort of the editing and the way it's shot, sort of just slowly like slither all the setup up. And then suddenly you're being thrown into that dream. You see the dude next to the door, he leads him out, then you go behind the diner. And the thing about the jump scare is you're kind of expecting something. You're expecting something weird, something odd happening. And David Lynch is known for lingering on those creepy images, but instead you see a brief flash of it. You see this like character covered in grass, smiling, dirt all over his face. Is he in camo? What is he? Is he a monster? Who fucking knows? Because he appears in the corner, but then just heads back, and then all the noise just starts to distort. There's no loud noise. There's a brief one, but it all just dissipates in an instant, as if it never happened. And it sort of sets him back to seeing that dream. In an ironic sense, it's like he got his sort of Hollywood dream. He saw his dreams, and now he's forever traumatized by it. And then by the end of the movie, that same thing sort of happens, where, Holly, wait, no, Holly, I mean, Betty, by the end, she's desperately searching for her lover, Rita, and wanting to find her address, and wanting to take a sort of revenge, after the idea of her was taken over by a different dude. And then it just sort of ends up just being a sort of cycle, but not in the traditional sense. She ends up on Mulholland Drive, but she doesn't get crashed into, and the cycle continues where she's sent to this heavenly upstairs, and she sees Rita, and she sees all these wonderful things, and then she's sent back down. And the way she had to go there was through the box, which ultimately had nothing inside, even though the box has been built up throughout the entire movie as a sort of, I guess, something like the Pulp Fiction suitcase. Instead of embracing that sort of pop culture-esque fiction like what Pulp Fiction does, it doesn't subvert it in the storytelling sense, but from a moral sense and from a idea sense, from a legacy sense. This movie looks at the ideas of Hollywood and what it means to people. Because early on, Betty's basically, she walks into Los Angeles with such high hopes. And we have the similar shot of seeing the Mulholland Drive sign, being driven over top, and as it, dissipates. It's the same thing, but for Los Angeles, but with this, fake banner, this fake looking of what Los Angeles looks like, and this, traditional image, and it feels like, oh, we're here in the hills, and my aunt gave me this wonderful opportunity. But then by the end of the movie, something like iconic symbols like Mulholland Drive are just sites for the dead, where things will just forever continue to collapse in itself, and nothing will be resolved in the end, because that's what Hollywood does. It gives you high hopes, and that's what Hollywood is always known as, and that's what Betty goes into Hollywood thinking, only to come out just like everyone else, where she doesn't get what she wants, and she ends up chasing the dream forever, which is basically Rita. And Rita has no past. She used to have one, but she doesn't remember it. And then she'll just hold on to anything that she wants to, which therefore continues the cycle no matter what. Because Hollywood's not looking for souls who actively want to be in Hollywood, but ones who are trapped in Hollywood. And there's just this sort of dynamic where both seem on the same level, but both have different goals, and no matter how much they relate to each other, feeling lost and have this passionate scene where they kiss each other and they have sex together, in the end Rita goes for the director, the one who ended up, instead of fighting against the system, just got belittled by it, where a quite literally old style cowboy tells him what to do in this sort of hypnotic sequence where he keeps asking him what does he want and does he truly feel this, like he's looking inside of him, not looking for straight up answers, as if Hollywood has these higher beings. And then those higher beings, like the executives, they're shot in this sort of way where they act weird and weak, but they basically dominate the entire presence. Because the scene where the director meets up with these two executives, you barely cut the director at all, because you just see these two dominating the space with just their words and their physique. Their words don't really mean anything, just their physique just takes over. And then even outside of it, it's just a sort of pyramid, where even further above there's the dude in the chair who has this sort of glass mirror. He's just sitting in a chair as this speaker is so far away from him that you can barely recognize who he is. He's a sort of mythical figure hiding in the darkness because he doesn't want to admit who he is. He's a sham, and he's just holding whatever power he has, even though he's sitting down. He's weak compared to his bodyguard next to him. And he keeps people at a distance from this sort of glass-eyed, rose-tinted view, in a way. That mirror, that glass barrier sort of represents sort of the barrier between the man and the myth, where you don't really recognize who the person is. You sort of view them through a glass viewing, through like a projector, through the screen. Like how we view Hollywood stars today as these mythical figures, these gods, when they're just human beings that happen to be in popular pieces of media. And I've been speaking a lot about the metaphors. I don't even really need to dive into the plot. In fact, I think it'd be more fun for you guys to just watch it by yourself. And if you've already watched it, then you understand what I'm getting at. Because this film is falling through this mystery device, and all these mystery tools that you'd think would be explained are never explained. And there's no climax to it. Because this is not a Hollywood movie. This is a movie about Hollywood, but it's not a Hollywood movie about Hollywood. Like just a sort of sham. This is the real deal, and this is what happens. Not from a literal perspective, of course. Lynch's whole dreamlike vibe, Lynchian. Of course, it's not told in a direct sense. It's told from multiple perspectives. It's told through a sort of cultish transformation, through a cycle, through a literal just body spiritual awakening where people swap forms and they slowly become who they really are, and they sort of just live on with outside of a body and are desperate to search for anyone to feel naked by, but they will never feel any happiness in the end. And that's what all of them go through. There's a lot of sexual tension throughout, and it's used so appropriately and with such maturity that it's almost unbelievable that this movie just even exists and was allowed to exist. This is just an incredibly just well-handled movie about a subject that could easily be broken down to a single fact. And it's just a perfect combination of what Lynch's ideas can create and how they're both used as alliteration, as metaphorical, as spiritual, in whatever way he views reality. And I feel like I am not even beginning to scratch the surface on this first viewing. Man, these two movies I feel really passionate about. I wish I did research on Mulholland Drive. I wish I got the criterions for these movies. I rented Mulholland Drive. I pirated Eraserhead for the second time, but I really want to own these movies physically someday. They are genuinely just really good movies, and I'm so glad I got to talk about Mulholland Drive, even though I probably talked about it less than Eraserhead. And I know this has been a sort of brief version of, like, other The Dumps episodes already got a dynamic going, but I just wanted to lay out all my thoughts on two movies that I've genuinely wanted to talk about. And Lynch has always just been an interesting figure to me in general, and I'll probably continue to talk to him, maybe with other people later on. As for the future of The Dumps, I have 2 episodes planned with guests next week and the week after that. 2 guests, I will not say who is which. You probably wouldn't know them anyway, but I'm excited to talk with them about their own favorites, stuff they want to talk about. And if you want to join along on my journey, go listen to those episodes when those come out, and I hope you finish this one too. And if you want to be on the podcast, you can email me at xanderwithaz09@gmail.com. You can email me, or you can talk to me on Twitter, whatever. I meant X. Sorry, X. But yeah, this was The Dumps. This was a kind of short one. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you had a good day, and I hope whatever you felt about the movie, or both movies, go speak about it in the comment section. Thank you for watching the Lynchian Hour, or whatever I'm going to title this. And yeah, I still want to know what that baby is. What the fuck is that baby? What is it made of? Who made it? I need to know about this. David Lynch, reveal your secrets now, please. Please, I need answers. I need answers!